You've been cordially invited to another episode of I Will Tell You What, the podcast that's all love Black history. I Will Tell You What is presented by Hueido, and I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that tells you these love stories every single Monday. So don't forget to subscribe on the tube of you if you haven't yet, or listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And of course, follow us everywhere so you can stay up to date on the latest I'll Tell You What news. And if you really want to support, I thank you, but you can definitely do so by joining us on the Treon of Pay. And if you have any questions or anything like that, definitely head to I'llTellYouWhat.com and drop them there. So because Valentine's Day is this week, it made so much sense to reflect on Black Hollywood's favorite couple, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. Now, their profound love shown through their unwavering commitment to each other and their shared dedication to civil rights activism is what makes them so beloved. Their love inspired millions because how many celebrities you know maintained a happy marriage for decades? Right. And yeah, I mean, of course, they had that open marriage era, but that was just like one of the chapters to their 5-decade-plus long love story. So there's so much I have to tell you about if you couldn't tell, so let's start from the very beginning. He tells her he wants to marry her, buy her a house, and start a family. She wasn't Ruby Dee then, she was Ruby Wallace, and she was just a college student at Hunter at the time when her boyfriend, a musician named Frankie D. Brown, made this proposal. As she mulled this over, her mom said, quote, "He can take care of you while you finish school," but ultimately told her the decision was hers. So on August 31st, 1941, Frankie and Ruby got married, quote, at Mother Zion AME Church by Reverend Benjamin Robeson, Paul's oldest brother. Frankie was the type of husband that did all the things that his wife wanted. Like, for instance, Ruby hated the last name Brown, so she asked him to get rid of it. She said, quote, "I didn't want to be Mrs. Brown. Mrs. D sounded better." And so Frankie did. He also kept his promise and bought them a home, a brownstone in Harlem. Ruby loved it. Quote, "I couldn't imagine I'd ever leave it." But realistically, this marriage was never going to work. Frankie was a musician and Ruby was a student and a theater actor, so their schedules barely synced up. So Ruby spent more time with her colleagues at the theater than her husband, and that led her to an enchanted New Year's Eve. Quote, "That was the night, I suppose, I fell in love again, and Elwood Smith fell in love with me." Now their tryst, if it was even that, was brief, but a divorce from Frankie would soon come next. Now she asked for a divorce in early 1945, perhaps realizing she was unfulfilled in her marriage. Frankie took his time to do so, so when he was home after his music gigs, Ruby would alternate her time at her mom's place until he was back on the road again. Now this got old, of course, and Ruby just wanted to be free. Eventually, the divorce was granted sometime in 1945. So Ruby continued to throw herself into her acting and soon was asked to audition for a role in a play named Jeb that was starring an actor she had never heard of before, Ossie Davis. Quote, "He looked like a country bumpkin, innocent, good-natured, and not too bright, and perhaps just the kind of person with whom white folks felt comfortable." Now, this is how a young Ruby Dee would describe this actor she did not know, this Ossie Davis guy. Ossie would remember his first impression of Ruby as, quote, "a little girl who looked like a teenager with long plaited hair that came down her back and big eyes." Now, Ruby would laugh and make fun of the guy with the bobbly Adam's apple in ill-fitting secondhand clothing. But after getting promoted from understudy to the role opposite of Ossie, she said she remembered, quote, "feeling something like a bolt of lightning, an electrical charge, flash between us." Now, though she started to see him differently in that moment, Ossie did not. He always thought Ruby was attractive, but that was it, essentially. They were co-workers. After Jeb ended, they were cast in a touring production of Anna Lucasta. Ossie wrote, quote, "The 1946-1947 tour of Anna had a profound effect on Ruby and me. Thrown together under all kind of conditions for more than 9 months, it became a chance to rehearse our coming married life. It was haphazard. We certainly hadn't planned it, but it was absolutely invaluable." And it was through those months on the road that nudged Ruby and Ossie closer with each passing moment. He recalled a time while on tour on Christmas Eve where they danced all night long until the next morning. Quote, "And I remember through it all, knowing neither of us speaking a word, just knowing that we were in love, head over heels, and stuck with each other forever." Now that beautiful romantic moment was just that, a moment, because by the summer of 1947, Ruby left the tour to take a role in a film with boxer Joe Louis. So then they went their separate ways. Sort of. They continued to communicate through phone calls, telegrams, and occasionally seeing each other during breaks in their respective projects. Their time together solidified the feeling felt during their time apart, and Ossie would send Ruby a message that would change both of their lives forever. A proposal. Ossie Davis proposed via telegram to Ruby Dee, and Ruby accepted. On a day off of working together on the play The Smile of the World, on December 9th, 1948, Ossie and Ruby went to New Jersey to get married. Their siblings were their witnesses, and their married life would officially begin. Now, I believe in the following year, Ruby was pregnant with their first child. Being pregnant, though she wasn't showing, ruled her out of a job in the movie No Way Out, where she would have been playing Sidney Poitier's wife. Trigger warning. The same night she learned that she no longer had the job, she discovered blood, which first appeared like spotting, but eventually became full-blown blood. Ossie and Ruby rushed to the hospital where she was observed. What Ruby would describe in their autobiography reminded me of how the treatment of Black maternal health has been an epidemic for decades at the very minimum. Ossie had to go to work, so Ruby was there alone to advocate for herself while she stayed there. Her symptoms increased as she began to have really bad cramps. She wrote, quote, "The cramps were similar to menstrual cramps, only worse. The nurse assigned to her room was annoyed and agitated that she kept buzzing and buzzing and buzzing for help. Imagine that." While using a bedpan, Ruby said, quote, "I felt something like a tiny elbow protruding from me." A nurse frantically called a doctor, and when he went to examine Ruby's stomach, their child fell into the bedpan. Ruby, forlorn, recalled the feeling as, quote, "There were no rainbows. Despair flat out." She sunk into depression while Ossie tried keeping her spirits up as best he could. The next day, she told her agent, and her agent called back later with an offer for a different role in No Way Out. She accepted the job, as many of us throw ourselves into work to deflect from grief. But by 1950, less than a year after their miscarriage, they'd be pregnant again while Ruby was cast as Rachel Robinson in Jackie's biopic. And in August, they had their first child, a daughter named Nora. They'd have their son Guy in 1952. And in 1956, their daughter Hasna was born, who was named after Ruby's sister Laverne. Now that they had their families, settling into the reality of their careers and home life would be something that they would both have to adjust to. There was a point in Ossie and Ruby's marriage where they created the normal that worked for them, but after some trial and error. Earlier in their marriage, when Ossie would get job after job, Ruby would frequently be left at home with the kids. She told Ebony magazine in 1979, quote, "I used to be very jealous of the fact that he could go away and be free of me and the children, to go off so easily and work at things he wanted to do. And I'm stuck with the babies and frustration pounding on the walls." And quickly, Ruby learned that, obviously, she was not about this life. She had a conversation with Ossie about it. Quote, "I was the sacrifice. Often, when I turned down things, it was because the children were there and I didn't want to leave them. I had to grow to the point of not so much needing his approval. I had to grow to the point where I could say, well, Ossie, I'd like to do this and I'm going to do it. Now, they compromised by finding someone to help with the household duties while also finding ways to get Ruby roles in the same projects Ossie was working on. And they would try to travel together as a family while working on site, or sometimes they would just simply turn down jobs. Now, that's one reason why they turned down the opportunity to tour with their play, Pearly Victorious, in the early 1960s. They didn't want to take the kids out of school and interrupt their lives. Another experiment that they tested was the concept of an open marriage during the mid-1960s. Now, you might have guessed, Ossie was the one that presented the idea. Quote, "We decided to give ourselves permission to sleep with other partners if we wished, as long as what we did was honest as well as private, and that neither of us exposed the family to scandal or disease." Quote, "Yes, I finally agreed. The only way to really hold on to something is first let it go," Ruby said. So while Ossie was away working on a film, he tried to frolic with an on-set nurse that was assigned to the movie. Quote, "She was single and free, and there was nothing to stop us from being intimate, but the fact that we were the kind of people we were." He was honest about this arrangement, but through a night of talking, he said all that was left was, quote, "awkwardness and a clumsy silence." Ossie wrote that nothing came of this. Meanwhile, Ruby engaged in a relationship with a musician who was married with kids. She said, quote, "It more seemed like a role in a play I could be rehearsing. It really didn't seem like me at all, not at first." She also went on to say, quote, "I knew whatever adultery was, it wasn't freedom." She also realized that though this man had confessed how much he'd loved her through the years, she engaged in this relationship just to spite the fact that Ossie introduced this idea in the first place. But ultimately, this wasn't going to work. You know it. I know it too. Ruby wanted Ossie, and obviously, Ossie wanted Ruby. Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee became Black Hollywood's favorite couple for many, many reasons. They shared a dedication to civil rights activism and the movement early on, despite how it impacted their careers. Michelle Bergen, a writer for Ebony magazine, wrote, quote, "Their work took them to prisons, hospitals, bonded them with workers and unions and the poor, rallied them to the cause of racial equality. They even became friends and safe spaces to legends like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and their families. They were revered as the Black couple in the industry that didn't divorce or cheat with white partners publicly, but instead continued to love each other out loud and without shame. Their marriage was tried and true and an inspiration to so many." As they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary at the end of 1998, they released their autobiography and also held a gala attended by many, many celebrities, including Felicia Rashad, Debbie Allen, Rachel Robinson, Sidney Poitier, Vanessa Williams, Lynn Whitfield, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Ann Curry, Cicely Tyson, Maya Angelou, Stevie Wonder, Hank Aaron, and many, many more. They were a source of guidance and wisdom for other known couples like Will and Jada Pinkett Smith and Mary Mary's Erica Campbell. Now, when discussing their marriage in 1979, Ossie said, quote, "If we couldn't have become friends, we would have run out of this relationship long ago." Perhaps that is why their open marriage in the 1960s had the underlying condition that neither one of them would actually leave, despite whatever experiences occurred during that time. And they didn't, because their relationship to each other was more important than whatever fling they entertained. They remained together until Ossie's death in 2005. After he passed away, Ruby remembered all the nights where she took her time getting into bed only for him to be asleep by the time she climbed in, and she deeply regretted that. Ruby wrote about Ossie, quote, "I thought I loved you when we got married, but as I see now, I was only in the kindergarten of the proposition. To arrive at love is like working on a double doctorate in the subject of life." Ossie wrote about Ruby, quote, "One thing is certain, The best of me has been subsidized by the best of what you are. I have no hungers that you do not feed. Their life and love experience brought them to this point where they knew that they were each other's true soulmates, fully deserving of the respect and honor bestowed. They were what the kids say, goals. But it wasn't easy. They experienced heartbreak, cancer, and loss. This wasn't a journey for the faint of heart, but one that only they could embark upon in this life and beyond. When Ruby passed away in 2014, she joined Ossie in what she described as, quote, a special urn, large enough and comfortable enough to hold both our ashes. The urn was inscribed with the following: Ruby and Ossie in this thing together. And that, Owl Runners, concludes the love story of Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. Subscribe, follow, support on the Treon of Pay, and I'll see you next week for yet another Love Black History story. See you in the pews.
Stick about now.